Hey, how you doing? This is RJ. So, over the last week, I kind of went down a rabbit hole concerning a few things that I wanted to know about, which were centered around victimization narrative. Because I ran across something that talked about the victimization narrative and its component parts and how it expresses itself by rhetoric, which stories are rhetoric. So I figured, yeah, that's where I want to go. I want to know more about this. But as I started to read more information about this exact topic, I found something much, much scarier. And what was that, you may ask? Well, it was an explanation of victimization narrative and how it is used and should continue to be used in the actual application of justice. And I thought to myself, wow, I have to talk about this because I'm always talking about the traditional idea of a hero. That's what my entire channel is based around. And a hero is a paragon of virtue. And although they usually speak about those virtues in a specific number and order, being prudence, justice, fortitude, temperance, and prudence is considered the charioteer of those other three horses, justice is considered the lead horse. Justice is considered the strongest. And so the corruption of those virtues, the corruption of the heroic life, the good life, the actual civilized life usually comes about through an attack upon that strongest member, which is justice, which is what we see around us today. And I want to talk about what I found and just scratch the surface. And I don't know, maybe that sounds like a boring topic to cover, but I can almost guarantee you that at least 98% of you, if you get to the end of this video, you will be scared. You will be scared that these ideas are actually being implemented within our systems of justice, right down to the beat cop. And I know this may sound like a strange segue, but we must push back against these kinds of narratives. And one simple, but I would also include essential way of pushing back against these victimization narratives or any kind of narratives that corrupt ideas like justice is to promote healthy narratives, narratives about true traditional heroes, which is why I have 3 graphic novels that focus on that very specific idea. Links for those are in the description and in the pinned comment. You're looking at some of the spectacular art from my graphic novels in the background. They're merit-based in their creation, going back to traditional older ways of telling a story that's based upon the truth of human existence. So if any of that looks or sounds appealing to you at all, click on one of those links in the description and go on over and see if one of my graphic novels is for you. All right, so I want to take you down this rabbit hole that I went down. Now, the first thing that I saw concerning this victimization narrative or victim narrative that started scratching at my mind, well, it described what they call the 2 main functions of a victim narrative. And they are, number 1, narrative form, which concerns the character, and it is to create a protagonist-antagonist framework, which is to say, to create your protagonist as opposed to an antagonist, which also fits the form of victim-victimizer. And then the second part is the narrative function, because the first was the narrative form. Second being the narrative function deals with identification, the connection of the narrator to the audience through the protagonist. And thus the author uses an appeal to people's emotions and pity, which they call here pathos. And I talk about pathos a lot, but the entire structure, again, the narrative form and the narrative function, is first of all to set up this narrative contrast of victim and victimizer, then have the author connect those ideas to the audience through the protagonist by saying, look, this quote unquote hero is a victim. They identify with you in certain ways as a victim, and therefore you give credence to this entire narrative by, as a member of the audience, identifying with that protagonist and saying, yes, yes, I understand exactly how they feel, again, all through pity, and thus confirm the very structure of victim narrative. So I started to do research on this topic. And when I would pump in the keywords for victim narrative and rhetoric, I kept on coming up with this one journal article. And this journal article is not some out-of-the-way journal article. Now, when I first looked at it, I said, wait a minute, they're actually saying this is a good thing. This victim narrative is a good thing. I didn't want to read it. But then I said to myself, wait a second. I should really read something from the other side where they explain in their own words, for themselves, to their own side, why they think this is a good thing. And boy, let me tell you, when I read this, and again, I'm only going to scratch the very top surface of this article, it was terrifying. And it was terrifying. Why? Because I'm looking at England right now and seeing what is going on right now in England. And I'm saying to myself, they've already implemented this in parts of Europe. So shout out to my good friends at Lotus Eaters, Carl Benjamin and Connor Tomlinson. And why? Well, first off, because I would really, truly like to know if anyone at Lotus Eaters has run across academic papers like I'm about to describe. And secondly, because if I'm to credit anyone with informing me about what is actually going on within Great Britain now and over the last couple of weeks, I would say, yeah, that's Lotus Eaters. And very briefly, what is going on? Well, a second-generation immigrant who never acculturated into British culture at all went on a spree of unaliving very young white girls. Several of them are no longer within this world, and the media within Great Britain decided to either try to silence or downplay the entire thing, which just ticked the British people off. And so these British people started to protest, and there was then counter-protests by immigrant communities. And what has happened since then is that these immigrant communities, who have literally destroyed things and beaten people, have got off scot-free with their protests, whereas the English people are being herded into prisons, jailed for literally posting things on Facebook. Simple memes, like pictures of immigrants saying, "This is coming to a town near you soon." And they are literally in Great Britain right now, emptying out some of their prisons of vicious criminals who have done very disturbing things so that they can jail these English people who have, quite honestly, some of them just witnessed one of these English protests where they're protesting mass immigration. And again, jailing people for posting memes on Facebook, having the Prime Minister go on television saying, "We will find you, we will track you down," and having a ridiculous statement come out even over the last week wherein the police were saying, if you're in America and you actually break what are essentially censorship laws concerning the internet, we are going to come after you as well. Which I guess they didn't get the memo from about 250 years ago that the entire reason why America was founded was to tell England you can take your laws and rules and shove them where the sun don't shine. But the end point of this entire thing is that the English people are now calling out the British government saying there is a two-tiered justice system. The immigrants, they are treated according to one tier of justice, which is much lighter, and the English people are being treated to a second tier, which is much, much harsher than the first. And the government is saying, no, there is no such thing as a two-tier justice system within Great Britain. Even though people are able to pull up examples of this exact thing happening according to some of the instances that I just described. Now, why am I describing all this? Well, I'm describing it because I think I found the answer to exactly why the people in power, especially since they have a socialist government now in power, why they think, first of all, they're not lying, why they can come out with a straight face and say there is no two-tier justice system, and where the entire thing originates from. Because the entire thing originates from a justice system which now sees victim narrative or victimization narrative as the center of everything that they do, as the center of what they call justice. So I'm going to read you some excerpts from this article that I found. And this article is from the European Journal of Criminology. It was published on May 3rd, 2018. It is subtitled Stories of Injustice Towards a Narrative Victimology. And I will put the link for it in the description if anyone wants to go and read it. Now, I want to emphasize right off the bat, this is not a fringe publication. This is the European Journal of Criminology. And while if it has articles in it like this, you might just call these things fringe, but at the same time, it has weight within, at the very least, academic circles and circles which deal with the administration of justice on the lowest level, which is policing. And again, I should note, this is in English. So we're talking influential within Europe, within the English sphere of Europe, certainly. And as you can guess by the title, they actually claim that they need to move towards turning criminology into something which at its heart is concerned with victimization narrative. And to paraphrase the first couple of paragraphs, they say, well, all the other social sciences have already accepted this, and we need to basically get with the times. And what is this thing that they've accepted? They've accepted that narrative is the controlling system of understanding that particular discipline. And I've actually witnessed this firsthand within the first degree that I actually took, which was history. When I was taking a history degree, it was about 30 years ago, there were certain things that we were taught about history and how history functions and how you use it. And we were taught the approach, the factual approach, the logical approach, and that's how you broke down history and it became useful. And we were literally taught that these narrative ideas and ideas like historiography were fallacious ways of looking at history. They just led to bad academia and should be completely ignored as being anything serious. And yet, I have a friend who is just now going to the exact same university that I first went to get my history degree, and it is right now necessary for each history student to take a class on historiography. And when I heard that, I just about lost it. I said to him, this is a logical fallacy. The entire thing is based upon a logical fallacy. It's looking at history through narratives. That's ridiculous. It's got zero basis in fact whatsoever, and they're making this a required course that you have to take. This is nonsense. But yeah, this is what has happened within the social sciences. And what they're saying here within criminology is, let's get with the times. Everybody else has already accepted that narrative is the center of social sciences. We're going to have to do the same. It just took so long for us because we were concerned in criminology with actual facts, but we have to divest ourselves of that right now. And again, I have to say, this is from 2018, but I quite honestly see this as now implemented within European systems. So let's get into a couple of examples, statements from this paper, just to show you a few things that I'm talking about. The first is the following short statement. It says that criminology needs to come to the realization that narratives are important whether or not they are true or false in what they do, not necessarily what they reveal. Now, you may agree with that statement by saying, sure, as they say here, they are important, but they're not centrally important. They're just part of what's important. But no. This is the first volley in saying, no, these are centrally important. They are what criminology must completely and utterly be based upon. These ideas of narratives, which are important whether or not they are true or false. And this is really the heart of the entire thing that follows. It's the fact that these people completely and utterly divorce themselves from any idea of truth. And since they divorce themselves from any and all ideas of something can be true, then why in the world would they concern themselves with facts? Which is what criminology has been up until this point. They need to divest themselves of that and look at these narratives, whether they're true or false. It doesn't matter. Why? Because there's no such thing as true or false. It goes on to say, for most scholars, a narrative is a temporally ordered, morally suggestive statement about events and or actions in the life of one or more protagonists. Now, first off, I want to stop right there and just say, somebody may be saying, since they're using the word protagonist, they're just talking about stories. And I would answer that yes and no. And I would go back to an older video that I did years ago talking about Marika Tamaki. She's a writer who works for both Marvel and DC Comics. And I called her at that time the best comic writer who will never write a good comic. Why? Because she did an interview, which I covered, where she says, people are essentially nothing. We're made up of nothing. We're just mimics, monkeys, that mimic the things that we see around us. And those things that we see around us that we mimic, it doesn't matter where they come from. It can be what you call real life. It can be story. She gives the two equal footing. And I go on to discuss the absurdity of that way of thinking within that older video. But that's exactly the point which we are getting to here. These people do not distinguish between a narrative which is true and a narrative which is false. These people do not distinguish between a narrative which actually happens to people and a narrative which is simply written down by someone. They each have equal weight. It doesn't matter because, again, there is no truth or falsehood, which then leads to you don't have to concern yourself with the facts. It's a narrative one way or the other, and they both have equal footing. And right here, when they talk about it as most scholars understand a narrative as a temporally ordered, morally suggestive statement. Now, what does temporally ordered mean? Well, again, it means there's no such thing as truth. You can't pin any of this on a principle of truth, any kind of principle at all that exists out there as a form, like justice, the traditional idea of justice. No, that's completely gone. Everything is based upon what happens within time, that happens within the events within people's lives. So the old idea of justice, the idea that justice exists as a thing, that it's an objective thing that we can point to and say, yes, according to justice, this is right, this is wrong, this is true, this is false, that's completely gone. Again, that's what temporally ordered means. And then that leads to what he says is morally suggestive statements. That is to say, if there is no true and false, if it's all based upon the temporal, then morality really is just suggestive. There's no real morality, it's just morally suggestive. And I'll get into their replacement for this moral basis in a few minutes, but it's important to note that statement, morally suggestive. And they go on to talk later on about the moral load instead of morality, and how a moral load might downplay or reverse or deny any kind of moral implication. Why? Well, because a victim narrative enters into it and says, well, the victim narrative takes the entire moral load, as they say. Again, the narrative based upon just events within the people's lives, not something greater, not something principle, not something that exists objectively, and therefore can downplay some of these actions which happen to say, no, they're not actually morally good or bad, quote unquote. Then it goes on to say, and I know this is going to sound like gobbledygook when I first read it, but please bear with me. It says, for instance, narrative has emerged in the literature on sense-making and meaning-making in the aftermath of trauma and grief, the manner in which victims account for their experience in feminist scholarship on victims in social and political movements, the manner in which victims seek participation in criminal justice processes, and in the literature on victims in restorative justice. And by the way, yes, that was one sentence. And as usual, with trying to sell these quote-unquote progressive ideas, they hide what they're trying to say at the end. And the end is talking about restorative justice. So what are they saying here? They're basically saying, once again, that first of all, if there's no such thing as truth or falsehood, and we don't have to concern ourselves with facts, then how do we determine what exactly justice means when it enters into trying to rebalance the scales? Well, you look at something like restorative justice. It's no longer that you're paying back the society for your crimes. No, you have to, in restorative justice, restore to the person themselves what has been lost to them. It concerns and is focused on the victim, of course. And of course, where do they get all of this from? Well, it's from feminist scholarship, as they say, talking about victims in social and political movements, talking about how women participate in the criminal justice system by actually feeling that, quite honestly, I can think of no other way to put this in my own terms, feel that justice is only done when they are granted revenge. And how, pray tell, do they try to figure out what this justice looks like if you can't concentrate on facts or anything of the kind? Well, again, you look at how much trauma and grief these people have had to go through, the aftermath of that from the perspective of the victim, and then you try to compensate them for that. That's where the, as far as I'm concerned, revenge part comes in, what they call justice. And then they go on to talk about how to use narrative as a root metaphor for studies in victimology. Again, it is to determine who is and who is not a victim according to a narrative. Not according to truth, not according to facts, but according to narrative. And I wanted to bring that up, not only the fact that they talk about narrative as being the root metaphor, but calling it a metaphor itself. Because what are we talking about here? Well, we're talking about narrative, which is what? Which is rhetoric. And what's the problem with rhetoric? Well, again, go back to Aristotle. The problem with rhetoric, especially when you use it as part of a story, is the fact that it is the easiest corruptible of all forms of argumentation. And what are they talking about here? They're talking about using it as a metaphor. What is a metaphor? If you try to implement it and stick it into a logical argument, it's a logical fallacy. So what is this statement saying? It's saying that no, logic and reason don't have any part of this entire thing. Victimology is what must be the heart of criminology, and the heart of victimology must be a narrative metaphor. Now, we'll get into that narrative metaphor, that narrative of victimology in just 1 second. So, I'm going to give you a fairly large quote here with a breakdown, their essential way of describing the entire thing. And I'm going to interject a little bit here or there, but I'm not going to explain the entire thing until I get to the end. And again, I understand the whole thing sounds like a bunch of gobbledygook, but you have to parse through it and try to understand what these people mean, because again, these are the ideas that are coming to a police station near you. If, of course, they're not already there, like they are in England. The article goes on to say, first, rather than focusing on why people harm, narrative victimology focuses on how people experience wrongdoing. What does that mean? Well, that means they're focusing not on the perpetrator, but on the victim and viewing the entire thing through the eyes of the victim, rather than, of course, the facts of what the wrongdoer did. And it has to be facts about what the wrongdoer did, because the wrongdoer, if they are guilty, will probably lie about the entire thing. So you can't trust his narrative. And that's why, again, they have to divest themselves of any and all ideas of fact whatsoever. You must focus instead on the narrative of the victim. It is victim-centered. The entire thing is studied according to how the victim perceives the entire thing. Then they go on to talk about what I had mentioned earlier, the idea of a moral load, and how, of course, the experience of the victim can downplay, reverse, deny moral implication. Again, not morality, because there's no such thing as morality, because there's no such thing as truth, just moral implication. That's why they can be ignored. It goes on to say, a key defining element of the experience of victimization, however, is intent, even wherein truth is absent. And by the way, they put truth in single quotation marks, which is a way of saying this isn't actually real. But I want to read that to you again. A key defining element of the experience of victimization, however, is intent, even where in truth it is absent. Green, which is one of the authors he quotes over and over again, Green states that the general concept of intent is an existential value underpinning the experience of victimization. Given the nature of narrative that it, quote, deals with the vicissitudes of intent, the narrative approach is particularly suitable to the examination of the experience of victim. So that's his end of number 1. Let's stop just for a second and go over this briefly. What's he saying? Again, look at the entire thing backwards from the end to the first, and you can see what they're saying is that, yes, we have to deal with intent, but they're completely redefining the idea of intent. Completely. They're saying it's all about the experience of the victims. And in their estimation, intent, as they quote, double quote, deals with the vicissitudes of intention. What does vicissitude mean? Well, it means the ever-changing nature, or you might say the random nature of intentions. Now, they're also talking about the existential value underpinning the experience of the victims. What they're saying there is that it's all about the experience. You might say that existential means that it's according to what exists. No, they're using the term here in it exists, again, according only to the temporal, as we said before, only according to what exists within events around you. There is no greater connection to any kind of truth. And that's, again, why they talk about the vicissitudes of intention, because it's all just random happenstance. It's all just chance. So yes, we're focusing on the experience. That experience is clouded by the fact that intent is not something either that has any real connection to any kind of fact, any kind of truth. And that's why they say that they must focus on the experience of victimization, which is intent, even where in single quotes, truth, it is absent. So what they're basically saying is, since they're putting truth in quotes, they're saying truth as an actual thing doesn't exist. Therefore, the former way of looking at intent, which was connected to principles of human nature, must be completely scrapped. Therefore, if we're focusing on our new definition of intent, who defines what intent is? Well, that's the victim. Now, I cannot stress just how completely destructive to the idea of justice, civilized justice, this entire thing that I have just read is. I have talked about this before. The idea of intent is quite specifically a Western cultural idea. It is an idea that developed within both parents of Western civilization, which was Jerusalem and Greece. It developed over a long span of time. Within Jerusalem, it coalesced around the stories of Job. Within Greece, it coalesced around the stories of the Oresteia, wherein both of these parents of Western civilization said to themselves, okay, the intent of the person actually matters. Whether or not they meant to do the thing actually mattered. Because before that, the justice system was based upon a revenge model. If we look at the old Jewish justice system, it was, and they describe this, I don't know, I think it's in Numbers, wherein they had to set up sanctuary cities. And they give the example, let's say you're chopping wood with your best friend in the forest, and your axe head comes off of your axe, flies up into the air just randomly as you went to do a swing, and it hits your best friend in the head and then kills him. You have to flee to one of these sanctuary cities. Why? Because the parents and the family of your best friend has every right to demand your death because of that, even though it was nothing but an accident. Why? Because the entire thing is based upon a revenge model. Intent does not count in those old systems. Intent was brought into the entire thing with, as we now see, the central point as being what happened to Job within Jerusalem, and within Athens, what happened to Orestes, who is the son of Agamemnon. But again, the entire point of intent within the justice systems of Western civilization for the last 3,000 years, because we're talking about Job and Orestes here. This is, we'll say circa 1200 BC, is to look at whether or not you intended to commit this crime. And how do they do that? As far back as Orestes and Job? Well, they look at the situation, they look at what is going on, they look at the facts, and then they compare it with what is true. Again, principles of truth. That is what intent is. And again, I should note here that if you look at the civilizations that both Greece and Jerusalem, the two parents of Western civilization, peeled themselves off of and became its own separate thing, if you look at those other civilizations, what do you see? Well, you see basically Middle Eastern civilizations which continued with a justice system that had no connection to the idea of intent. And this continues up until this day. I can remember, I think it was 10 years ago, where a tourist, I think she was French, went and vacationed in Dubai, and she was assaulted. And I can let you and your imagination infer what that actually meant to her. And then she went to the police to report this crime, and the police arrested her. Why did they arrest her? Because in that country, adultery is an actual crime punishable by jail time. Now, putting aside the fact that it's not here, the point is that she was arrested because she committed a crime. But you might say, well, she didn't intend to commit the crime. This crime was done to her. It didn't matter. Why? Because they have zero regard for intent. Zero. And this, by the way, is connected directly to the entire thing, which we're looking at England and say, why do these people not understand? Why do these people get off scot-free? Why? Because they have no clue. Because they were not brought up within justice systems that cared one whit about intent. That's why the entire thing is skewed in their favor, but I'll get to that. But again, cannot emphasize this too much. Right here within this paragraph is the destruction of the idea of intent completely by redefining it so that it's not about trying to determine the intent of the individual that committed the crime by looking at the facts and comparing them with principles of truth. No, it is to shift the entire burden of intent, so-called, to the understanding and experience of the victim. That's just a fancy way of saying, yes, we still have ideas of intent while completely obliterating any and all ideas of intent. The article then goes on to say, second, whereas intent and justification of certain doings is key in criminology narratives, a narrative victimology redirects focus first to understanding what has been done to us and how this relates to subsequent motivations, behaviors, and actions. This alteration in emphasis means neither that narrative victimology assumes victims to be passive subjects, nor that the main focus concerns the offender and his actions. Issues of self, including self-understanding, self-respect, and autonomy, are pivotal, and the main actor is the victim. However, the event or situation in which the self is victimized is attributed to the other. Narrative victimology would seek to query the interaction of the victim's story with the multitude of other stories that, particularly in and around justice processes, also concern the event that forms the nucleus of the story of victimization. So, again, what are they saying here? They're saying, first of all, as I referenced before, that we're taking the entire emphasis off of the person who committed the crime and putting the entire emphasis of viewing the entire thing according to the person, the victim of this crime. That is what is going to be the determining factor on whether or not intent actually occurred. However, as they say, even though that's the calculation of intent, that intent is still attributed to the other. Even though the victim gets to determine whether or not there's intent, they then can place that intent on someone other than the victim, the person who committed the crime, or the person they think committed the crime, or they want to have committed the crime. They can just place that intent upon them. Of course, depending upon how the victim experienced the entire thing. And how does the victim, first of all, try to determine this entire thing? Well, they talk here about the victim using self-understanding, self-respect, autonomy. So what do you do when you take all of those things and combine them together? Well, that's identity. They use their identity as the calculating tool to whether or not they have been victimized, and therefore whether or not there is intent on the part of the other person. And they say here, but we must have some kind of outside source to try to confirm this entire thing. What is the outside source to confirm this entire thing? Well, they look at the story of the victim and see how many other narrative stories of similar kinds actually exist around what they are saying. I'm sorry, but this is completely bonkers. Now, I'm going to cover the real life application of this in just a minute, but if you look at the stories around you, and many of you are here because stories that you once loved have been destroyed, because these people keep on pumping out these ridiculous victim narratives within stories of characters that you once respected. Why in the world, you may be asking yourself, do they completely spam out these stories one after another of the exact same thing about these victim narratives? Why? Because, well, it's basically a form of, if you tell a lie often enough, people are going to believe it's true. That's the exact thing they're talking about here. They're saying, okay, let's look at whether or not this person's story of victimization, their narrative, is actually true. How do we do that? And again, actually true in quotation marks. They don't believe in truth. How do they do that? Well, they compare it to other stories around them. And again, you have to remember, they don't distinguish between real stories and fake stories, made up stories, or stories of people that they've actually experienced within real life. They don't distinguish between the two. They look and see if there are a comparative number of these stories out there to support the existence of their own victim narrative. What does that mean? Well, it means something like, oh, I'm a victim because this person, I feel, has slighted my experiences, let's say because they have light-colored skin and I'm a victim of their light-colored skin. And then the people who actually hear this cry of victimhood, again, the police, will say, well, look, there's all of these narrative statements about the fact that this happens over and over again. This must be true. Once again, bonkers. And again, that may sound like a completely ridiculous statement on my part, but you have to remember, these people do not believe in truth. They don't distinguish between real and false. It's all about comparative narrative. That's it. And again, it's a small thing, but that's why they've been spamming out these stories about victims. Not just to make themselves feel good, but to give a framework for their entire worldview of what they think justice is. And by the way, that puts an entirely new spin on what I'm always talking about, that director of content for Marvel Comics talking about how they're building the new mythology for progressivism. But let's move on to number 3. They say, thirdly, the impact of victimization itself can be understood in terms of its narrative implications. That is, the influence victimization has on the life stories of victims. As we will discuss in greater length, the experience of severe forms of victimization, even single and short-lived events, can disrupt the sense of continuity that a life narrative is intended to provide, with traumatic memory forcing a reconsideration of the chronology of much of the normative framework we apply. As we will argue, the victimization experience can simultaneously reveal the importance and the limitations of considering identity as narrative. Okay, so here's where we get into the what I think is really scary part of the entire thing. And it talks about some of the things that I've been talking about over and over again over the years concerning storytelling. They're talking about continuity. Now, here they're talking about a continuity of a life narrative. So let's take the entire thing and ask the following question. In such a system where the entire thing is true, where this is how they view how to police people, where victimization is the center of criminology, and criminology is what informs how police act. When and where and how does a crime actually occur? Well, in order to understand that, first of all, let's take a step back and look at the entire thing that they're describing here in this third part. First off, we have to always remember these people do not believe in truth. And if they do not believe in truth, where in the world are they coming up with any kind of secure footing for any kind of human existence whatsoever? Because they sort of realize that there needs to be some kind of footing, loose though it may be, because there is no truth, upon which human beings must stand in order to continue to exist, in order to continue to provide things, etc., etc. Where do they get this from? What is their substitute for truth? Their substitute for truth is narrative. And not just narrative, but a continuity of narrative. Because, as they say here, this is where criminal behavior actually enters into the entire thing. If you, at your core, do not have any concept of truth, which they believe no one does, then your narrative story is all you have in order to base your entire life upon. And the way that it works, the way that it continues to provide you with enough solace to live, is to do just that, to be continuous, to continue all the way through your life. So, where does a crime come into the entire thing? A crime comes into the entire thing when someone challenges your narrative and therefore causes you a traumatic experience. Why? Because they're challenging your narrative. That's the only footing for existence of your entire life that you have. If they're challenging your narrative, they're breaking the continuity of your narrative, then they're causing what? They're causing you trauma. They're causing you harm. You then become a victim. And how do they determine how severe this crime actually is? Well, in two ways. Number one, depending on how much the victim feels like they've been victimized, you must restore to them what they have lost, hence the restorative justice. But the second is because if you're challenging their narrative and it's a narrative held by a mass number of people around them, then that makes your crime more severe. Why? Because you're challenging an accepted narrative, not just of the individual, but a collected mass of people around them, and therefore threatening instability by threatening that one narrative. By the way, and I know it's going to tick some people off, but I'll have to point out here, this is the flip side of the mindset of, well, as long as no one was hurt, you can go ahead and do whatever you want. No, this is the flip side of that. It's not whether or not somebody was hurt, it's whether or not, in truth, the thing is morally right or wrong. But these people don't believe in any morality because they don't believe in truth. So the whole thing is about, well, is someone hurt? But they take that to the extreme of, does someone feel like they've been hurt? If you feel like you've been hurt, if you experience trauma, then you've been hurt and you're a victim, and someone did a criminal action against you by doing what? Again, by breaking the continuity of your narrative. Now let's take an example of how this actually works, because it's actually out there right now. It's the underpinning of hate speech laws. If someone says, this is my experience, and I look at them and say, facts don't care about your feelings, here are the facts, it completely destroys the entire narrative that you've set up for yourself in order to make yourself feel secure because you have no idea of truth. They will say, well, you just caused me trauma. You have made me feel bad, causing me harm and pain by disrupting the continuity of my narrative, and you've just committed a hate speech crime. And before you say, I don't care. I live in America. I have free speech. There's never going to be such a thing as hate speech laws here. You should really pay more attention to what's going on politically. First of all, just look at the fact that Britain is saying if you break our hate speech laws right now, we're going to come after you in America. And while that sounds ridiculous, you also have to remember that several years ago, when the European Union was being asked the question, how in the world are they going to implement these censorship controls over the internet when it's a global thing and you have freedom of speech in America, they answered by saying quite definitively, don't worry, hate speech laws are coming to America. And once again, before you dismiss that as being Europeans thinking they have too much control over the entire world, I'm sure that if you look at some of the mostly, but not all, Democrats and what they want to implement as part of their policy, it is the fact that they say over and over again, free speech does not include hate speech. But let's just move on to a more relevant real world example, which again is happening right now, which is what is going on within Great Britain right now. You have two sides, the English and the immigrants into England, both rioting, saying, first of all, the English saying, we don't want these immigrants here because, well, basically they're not civilized. And the immigrants saying, we're going to riot because you're telling us you don't want us here. And the police implementing a two-tier, as it appears, two-tier justice system by saying, okay, we're going to punish the English, but we're going to allow the immigrants to get off scot-free. Now, how does that work? How in the world do they say to themselves there is no two-tier justice system? Well, because they've already implemented this whole victimization strategy as a part of criminology, as a part of policing within England. That's how they can justify it. That's how they can say that. Why? Because they're applying the victimhood status narrative to both parties evenly. The problem simply is that there are two simple, different results for each group of people. Why? Because, of course, the immigrants are saying, you're disrupting our narrative, and therefore you're causing us harm. Therefore, we're victims. Therefore, the police should go after you. And why are they getting different results when they supposedly apply this same standard of victim narrative to the English people? Why? Because the end result is the English people are not victims. How can you determine that? Well, let's just look at the fact that up until now, the English people simply haven't rioted. That's an indication that you're not a victim. Or, to put it in other terms, you look at these other people and see the violence and destruction that they're causing, these riots that they're participating in and starting, and you would then conclude as part of the police that, well, because they're doing that, they're just expressing their anger about being victims, therefore they're the victims. The very fact that they riot and break the law shows that they are not the perpetrators of any kind of wrongdoing, they are the victim. And the very fact that the English people have not rioted up until this point would indicate, no, they're not victims. But let's say they have now rioted, why can't you apply the same standard to them and get the same results? Why? Because again, the immigrant people are saying this is based upon our feelings because they have no impulse control. And as such, you're hurting their feelings. They are victims. And as victims, they get to point the finger at who is the victimizer. And they're pointing the finger at the white people and saying, they committed a crime, go arrest them. But that's not the standard that English people would actually apply to the entire thing. English people are applying a standard of, wait a second, this is morally unjust. This is against the law. This is against the rules. You're breaking the rules. I'm not saying I'm personally hurt, and that's the basis of everything that I'm trying to convey with my protest here, or riot if it turns into a riot. No, I'm saying you broke the rules. You're doing something reprehensible, morally wrong, and therefore you need to be punished. The very fact that you're applying standards of objectivity to the entire thing shows you're not a victim. Even to the point of saying that, okay, if this is the way everything works, then the English people need to just simply riot and cause destruction and all that, which is the same as what the immigrants are doing, and they'll be treated the same way? No, they won't. Why? Because that's a calculated move. If you're going to say, well, I understand the system, and therefore I understand that this is what I must do in order to get said results, that's a cause and effect way of thinking, which again is a rational way of thinking, which again eliminates the fact that you're doing this out of purely emotional reasons. Now, you may be acting in an emotional way, but the reason at the heart of why you're doing it is a completely rational and unemotional thing. Therefore, once again, you are not the victim. So to boil the entire thing down into a few simple statements, the English people, in some way, shape, or form, are acting like civilized people. They are applying reason to the entire situation. They are calculating how to get the best results. They have impulse control because they've lived in a system for thousands of years since the beginning of their entire civilization within ideas of intent and how, therefore, you have to control what you intend to do. They're operating within systems like Christianity, which focuses on a God who says, I am the truth, therefore worship the truth. Or to put it another way, not just the British, but European citizens are civilized. And the immigrant populations are not civilized. They have no impulse control. They have no concept of the idea of intent. What they view as being justice is a revenge system. They easily lash out when they feel like their feelings have been hurt. These are all earmarks of being uncivilized, but the point is that those are also all the earmarks of being a victim. Therefore, if you apply the victim mentality to the situation, you will always allow the immigrants to get off scot-free because they're uncivilized and say to the English, we're going to punish you severely because you are civilized. That is what the victim mentality, according to a police system, leads to. Or to put it another way, to go back to the ideas of virtue, the destruction of the idea of justice within your society will destroy the civilized person and give all advantages to the uncivilized. And right now, the entire thing is going back to this victimization narrative. The victimization narrative based upon the fact that you're disrupting the continuity of my narrative within my life, which is what people supposedly need to continue to exist. Why? Because they don't believe in truth. Again, uncivilized don't believe in truth. Gee, how do those two things go together? And this is happening within England right now because it is the basis, as far as I can tell, of their entire justice system, right down to the cop who knocks on your door because you're posting Facebook memes that the government doesn't like. And this, as far as I'm concerned, is the same thing that happens within the good old US of A, within these Democrat-led cities, with them letting these people get off scot-free. The same thing is happening here in North America. It may not be happening in the section of North America that you live in right now, but it is here already, and it wants to metastasize. It wants to grow and take over the entire thing. It wants to destroy any true ideas of justice. Now, when I do videos like this, people always put in the comments, well, what do we do about that? Well, the answer to that question is simple in this case. And the first step in the entire thing is to take responsibility for all of this. Not to point the finger at them and say, it's all their fault. Yeah, they're the ones causing the destruction, but it's not all their fault. It is our fault. Why is it our fault? It's our fault because we've allowed these people who deny the existence of the true, the good, and the beautiful to take over not just our government systems, but the institutions within our government systems, such as policing. And again, I know I'm going to tick some people off when I say that, but that's the truth. When you allow people who deny truth exists, then this is what you get. And this is the product of the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, early 2000s saying, oh, their perspective is just as equally valid as mine. Their perspective of no truth exists is equally valid with the people who say truth exists. No, it isn't. Especially when the idea of truth exists and we must find out what the truth is the basis for our entire civilization. But again, back to the question of what do we do? Especially, let's say, if you're living in England, or one of these sections of America where all of this is taking place, especially in places where there already are hate speech laws. Places like England, where you will be arrested for posting Facebook memes that the government doesn't like. What do you do? How do you turn this tide? Is it going to be simple? No. It's going to be painful. It's going to be drawn out. It's going to be one of the most difficult labor pains that Western civilization has experienced. But what you do is you crush these people with merit. If you have to keep your mouth shut, keep your mouth shut. If you can't go out and protest, don't go out and protest. but crush these people with merit. Don't slide back into the barbarism of these people. Continue to be civilized, and in being civilized, show these people just how barbaric they actually are. Now, does that contradict their continuity of narrative? Yeah, that's the point. By all means, if you can contradict their narrative with the truth verbally, do so. But if you're not allowed to verbally because you'll be put into prison, then do it through your actions. But at the very least, right now, can't say this for the future, but right now, they're not going to arrest you because you write good stories, because you run a good business, because you get A's in school, because you're morally upright, because you're civilized. They will ignore you and downplay you and apply a two-tier justice system to you so that when you slip up, you will be severely punished. So the answer to it is to be civilized. And again, crush these people with merit. Why? Because it will not be you who crushes them. It will be the weight of their own ineptitude. And it comes back to that thing I'm always talking about. It simply comes back to virtue. Whenever you do something, do it to the best of your ability. Do it with honor. And that will drive the barbarian from the gate. So, if I've given you anything new to think about, hit like, hit the shield in the lower right-hand corner of your screen to subscribe, and leave me a comment. Tell me what you think about all this. And I want to thank anybody who has gotten to the very end of this video, because I think this is a very important video. All right, I'll leave it there. I'll see you later. Bye.